and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 4 English lesson on adjectives. So, we'll be doing our grade 4 English lesson on adjectives. And before we start with our lesson on adjectives, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. We're going to log in with our username as well as our password. And once we've logged in with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, and then grade 4. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adjectives. And this is a continuation of our previous lesson on adjectives. So in our previous lesson, we also did adjectives, but we specifically focused on the lessons on, does the adjective tell us what kind or how many? And also we had to identify the adjectives that describes. So today is going to be a continuation of adjectives or on adjectives. So our chapter is adjectives. The subject is English language arts. Grade 4, and our lessons is to identify adjectives as well as to order adjectives. All right. So basically, when we identify adjectives, right? Before we identify adjectives, an adjective is a word that tells you about the noun, right? So an adjective is a word that tells you about a noun. So we can either say that an adjective, it tells us about the noun, or we can say an adjective, it describes a noun, or we can say that an adjective modifies a noun, right? But it's basically the word that tells us more about the noun. And when an adjective tells us about the noun, it answers the question, what kind? And it answers the question, how many, right? So how many doesn't necessarily mean 1, 2, 3 to 100 or whatever, right? It can mean one, some, a lot, many, those type of things. So it will basically be in line of an amount, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, right? So those are adjectives that tells us how many. Then we have adjectives that tells us what kind. And what kind can either be big, small, color, certain things, the way dresses are, or so on, right? That can maybe tell us what kind. And often when adjectives are also being described, right? There's also a certain order in which the adjective can be described in, right? So we are going to identify adjectives, but also, and we're going to identify adjectives in the form of what kind and how many. And then we're also going to identify adjectives based in the order in which an adjective is, let's say, described. So if we, for example, have a sentence and Or if you write a sentence and you want to describe the noun or tell about the noun or modify the noun, then there's basically a certain order in which you need to write that, for example, that adjective, right? And it says often more than one adjective is used to describe the same noun. So if you want to describe, let's say, something that it's maybe, let's say, um, maybe prom night, and now somebody has on a beautiful long silky dress, right? So now you want to describe that dress. So then you can maybe say that she gave me a long red silk, or let's say roses, right? Or you can even say she has on a long silk dress, or say a long, let's say, silver silk dress. Because now you are describing it in length, you're describing it in color, and you're also describing it in texture, right? That is how you can also tell about an adjective and order adjectives. But when it comes to ordering adjectives, right, we are going to learn more about ordering adjectives when we go on to our tutorial lesson, right? And we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. All right. So adjectives that basically tell us about the noun, right? Or let's say an adjective, it tells us about the noun. And some adjectives, they tell us what kind, and some will tell us how many, or they answer the question what kind, and they answer the question how many. So when it comes to answering the question what kind, right? Then we can say the small baby smiled. The small baby smiled. So if we basically describe, or if we want to tell more about the baby, right? So what kind of baby? And then we can say the small baby. So what kind of baby? It's the small baby. Can be the small baby, the cry baby, the poopy baby, right? But you can describe the baby as in what kind of baby. She carried heavy books. And if we were to identify the adjective within the sentence, so what kind of books did she carry? She carried heavy books, right? So she carried heavy books. She carried, um, let's say, comedy books. She carried fictional books. She carried horror books, right? These are all things that will tell us what kind of books, right? It tells us about the noun. It describes the noun. It describes us what type of books, or it tells us what type of books the person is carrying. Then do we have some adjectives that tells us how many, right? And remember I said that with how many, it doesn't necessarily have to be 1 to 1,000, right? So if you look at the question, it says one baby smiled. So it's like you're asking yourself, how many babies smiled? So you can say only one baby smiled, right? One. That is, of course, in a form of number, right? So that can be even more easier because it's basically just numbering and saying how many babies in a form of numbers, or in the form of an amount, right? And then she carried some books. So you see, here is now the word some. It's not telling us that she carried 10 books, she carried 5 books. It's telling us she carried some books, and that also tells us how many. So it doesn't necessarily have to be she carried 5 books, 1 book, 10 books, right? She carried some books, right? And the word some can also tell us how many. She carried a few books can also tell us how many, right? She carried a lot of books can also tell us how many. So these are words that tells us either how many or they can tell us what kind. Or let's say they answer the question what kind or they answer the question how many. So to make it easier, in order for us to identify the adjective within a sentence, you can basically ask yourself what kind and the noun, or how many and the noun. And if we look at our sentence, right, remember a complete sentence has a verb and it has a noun, right? Which means that if we look at the sentence maybe of one baby smiled, then baby is the noun. So you need to tell us about the noun. So baby is the noun and smiled is the verb. It's something that the baby is doing, right? But our noun is baby, which means that when it comes to an adjective, you either need to ask yourself what kind when it comes to the noun or how many when it comes to the noun, not the adjective. The adjective is the thing that the baby is doing, but we describe the baby based on the adjective, based on the noun. So, how many nouns or what kind of noun, right? So now we're going to a+students.ca and we're going to identify some adjectives and then we're going to learn more about ordering adjectives. All right, so we're going into the lesson of identify adjectives. And like we said, this is a continuation of the previous lesson where we had to answer. We did the lesson, does the adjective tell you what kind and how many? And to identify adjectives that describes the noun. So today we are the identifying adjectives and we're going to order adjectives. All right. So now it says an adjective is a word that tells you about the noun. And some adjectives that answer the question either what kind or they answer the question how many, right? And we specifically went over adjectives that tells us what kind as well as how many. Now, let us look at our little activity. Okay, so we need to select the adjective within this sentence, right? Within the sentence. And when we identify an adjective within that sentence, remember, we do not select articles. And an article is a, an, or the, right? We don't select an article when it comes to an adjective. A, an, and the is not going to describe the noun, right? So if we look at the sentence, please read the interesting article. What is the adjective that basically describes or tells us about the noun? What is the word within that sentence that tells us about the noun? Is it please? Is it read? Is it the? Interesting? Or is it article? We need to identify the adjective within that sentence. It's like asking yourself, it's what kind of All right, so if we select the adjective within the sentence, and then we are going to select interesting, right? Because article is our noun, and the word that tells us more about the noun and that tells us what kind, that answers the question, what kind of article, and then we can say it is interesting because it is an interesting article. So the word interesting is our adjective. It tells us what kind of article. This is an interesting article. It tells us what kind of article. So article is our noun, and interesting is our adjective that tells us more about the noun because it's telling us that this is an interesting article. The house has two bathrooms. So the house has two bathrooms. If we look at the sentence, right? What is the adjective within that sentence? And if we look at that sentence, then we can say the adjective is two, because two basically tells us how many. It basically tells us how many, right? So two tells us how many. So two is our adjective. And then it says, all fish can swim. So all fish can swim. It's like saying fish can swim. So we need to now answer, or let's say we need to identify the adjective. All fish can swim. And if we identify adjective, then we can identify as in all. So basically, all fish can swim. All fish. So all is our adjective that tells us how many fish can swim, right? So all is our adjective. So they're asking how many, they're answering the question, how many fish can swim? Remember, it's best to ask yourself questions like how many or what kind in order for you to identify the adjectives because that is going to make it more easier. All right. So let's go to our test, right? Where we are going to identify adjectives within our test. So we need to select the adjective Remember, do not select any articles such as a, an, or the. Those are articles, right? And an article is not an adjective. An article is basically a lesson that is on its own, right? That we will do either some other time if we haven't done it yet. But an article is not an adjective. So we do not select an article as a form of an adjective. So he likes salty bacon. So if we identify the adjective, is it salty or is it bacon? It's like asking yourself, what kind of bacon does he like? So what kind of bacon does he like? He likes salty bacon. And yes, if we identify our adjective, then we can say he likes salty bacon. So salty is our adjective. It tells us what kind of bacon. So beautiful. Salty is correct. So well done. Salty is correct. Yes, salty because it tells us what kind. Beautiful. And it's way better to ask yourself, is it what kind or how many? So wonderful. I swallowed the delicious juice. So is thou our adjective, is it delicious or is it juice? So it's like asking yourself, what kind of juice did I swallow? I swallowed delicious juice. All right. So if we select our adjective, right? An adjective that tells us what kind, then it's going to be, yes, then it's going to be delicious. And delicious, it asks the question, what kind? So well done, guys. Delicious is correct. It tells us what kind of juice. So well done. All fish can swim. All fish can swim. Is our adjective all or is our adjective fish? And does it answer the question, what kind of fish? Or does it answer the question, how many fish? All right, so basically it is all, right? So all fish can swim. And yes, all because it tells us how many fish. Remember, I made mention and I said that when we answer the question, how many, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a number. It doesn't necessarily have to be 1 to 100 fish, for example. It can be, it can be like all fish. It can be some fish. It can be a few, can be many fish, right? But all is correct. And all tells us how many. So well done. It tells us how many, right? So remember, when we answer the question how many, it doesn't necessarily have to be a form of a number: one fish, 10 fish, 100 fish, right? But well done, guys. All is correct. And it tells us how many fish can swim. Julie has written many stories. So Julie has written many stories. What is our adjective within that sentence? Is it many or is it stories? And does it answer a question how many, or does it answer a question what kind of stories? So does it answer the question how many stories or what kind of stories? All right, and if we select the adjective, right, within that sentence that says Julie has written many stories, and then we are going to select many. Any, many, yep, it tells us how many stories Julie has written, right? So many, you see, once again, many. It doesn't say Julie wrote or has written 10 stories or Julie has written 20 stories. It tells us Julie has written many stories, and many stories, they basically answer the question how many. It does answer the question, yes, but it answers the question as to how many. Because remember, an adjective, they either answer the question how many or what kind, right? So in this case, how many, that tells us, for example, many, 10, 5, or so on, like an amount. And many is correct. So well done, guys. All right. 7 astronauts board the ship. So 7 astronauts board the ship. And if we select the adjective, is it 7 or is it ship? And does it tell us how many or does it tell us what kind? All right, so if we select the adjective, right, and then we will choose 7. We select 7 because it tells us how many astronauts boarded the ship, right, or board the ship. So 7, and as you can see there, they're giving us an actual number that tells us how many. But in other cases, it can be a few, it can be many, it can be a lot, it can be some, right? That tells us how many. So well done, everybody. So 7 is correct. Now we're going on to the next lesson, which is to order adjectives, right? We are now going to order adjectives. So an adjective, yes, it still tells us about the noun. It describes the noun or it modifies the noun, right? But within certain adjectives, right, there are, or let's say in certain sentences, there are words with more than one adjective, meaning that they describe or tell us about the noun, but in a multiple way. You understand? Instead of just using one word to say you have a beautiful dress, you can maybe say you have a beautiful red dress, or you have a beautiful red silky dress. You understand? So it's basically telling us more than one adjective that describes that same noun, right? So adjectives are words that tells us about the noun, modifies a noun, describes the noun, right? And often more than one adjective is used to describe a noun. So sometimes more than one adjective is used to describe the same noun, that very same noun, right? And an example of this is she gave me long red silk roses, which means that we are or she is describing the the roses. She's describing the roses. The roses is the noun, and she's describing that roses as long, red, and silk, right? So this is the adjective or adjectives that describes the noun, which are roses, which means that our adjectives, it's long, it's being described as long roses, red roses, and silk roses. And if we look at this table, right, this is the table that basically shows us the order. So when more than one adjective is used within a sentence to describe a noun, then the adjective usually go in a certain order. And if we look at this table over here, right, this is the table that usually shows us the order in which we can describe a noun. That is that if we have more than one adjective that is used to describe that very same noun. So if we have our article, right? Remember, we said that an article is not an adjective. The and a is not an adjective, right? An adjective is something that describes the noun, something that describes the noun. And you see, the noun is literally like the last thing over here. We need to describe either wall, car, stove. That is an example, right? Which means that if we, for example, say the flat red brick wall, right? If the sentence is the flat red brick wall, then it means that our adjectives that describes the wall, right, is flat, it is color red, and it is a brick wall, right? So that is how we can describe it, and we basically describe it in the order of opinion, size, shape, age, color, origin, material, and sometimes purpose or qualifier. Remember, there won't be everything won't be in there, but there will be certain like of these things in there in order to describe the noun. If we describe the car in this sentence, we can say it is an old Italian race car. So it's like asking yourself, what kind of car? And we can describe that car as an old Italian race car, right? That is how we are describing that now, that car as old, Italian, and race car, right? And car is our noun. If we describe the stove, right? The stove, which is a noun, then we can describe that stove as it is nice, it is little, and it is a camping stove. It's not just any stove, but it's a camping stove, which means that we can use the stove for camping. It is little, it can go in our car, in our boot, and it's a nice stove. So we need to then describe the stove in this order, which is opinion, size, and purpose. And when it comes to the purpose or the qualifier, this one over here, purpose or qualifier, right? and it is often considered part of the noun, like, for example, a race car or camping stove, right? So the purpose of qualifier, it's usually or often considered like, let's say, part of the noun, which is race car, camping stove, right? It already tell us what type of car it is. And when you put the purpose, which is this, or the qualifier, with the noun like race car or camping stove, the result is a similar, it's like similar to a compound word. It's like putting those, it's like saying race plus car is a race car. Camping plus stove is a camping stove. That is what we it's like calling it a compound word. Because now we adding that to, and it's like making it as one, right? So it's as if we are saying that that doesn't necessarily have to be an adjective, because that can basically be a compound noun, a compound word. So we basically just describe the car as old and Italian. Because race car, it's like we describing the race car as old Italian. And here we have an example of that: race car and camping stove. Even though it's two words, but it's like saying race plus car is a race car. Camping plus stove is a camping stove. So these we called compound words, right? All right, so now we need to put these words in order. A beak, red, pointy. A beak, red, pointy. Before we even put those in order, what is the noun within the sentence or these words? What is the noun? Because we need to describe the noun. Or you can just put it in order. How are we going to put this in order? Starting with A. So we're starting with A. It says a beak, red, pointy. We need to put that in order, and then our noun needs to be at the end. And we start with A. All right, so if we put this in order or put these words in order, right, especially when it comes to our ordering of adjectives, then we are going to say it is a red, a pointy, sorry, a pointy red beak. So we are basically describing the beak, right? We're describing the beak and we're describing it in the sense of it is pointy and it is red. That is how we are describing the beak, which is the noun. And remember, this is an article. So our adjectives over here is pointy and red. This is our adjectives. All right, now we need to put the words in order. Where are we? It says pool a swimming heart shape. So pool a swimming heart shape. We're going to start with A. We're going to start with A. How are we going to put these words in order? So we start with A. And if we put that in order, we can say, right, a heart shaped swimming pool, right? So we describe this swimming pool, which is the noun, as a heart shaped swimming pool, right? So that is how we are describing it, which means that heart shaped swimming pool is our adjective that describes what type of pool it is, swimming pool. All right, so before we end of our lesson, let us do a test. Right, so this is going to be our test. Let's put the words in order. We're going to put the words in order. It's yellow, ribbon, curly, the, or the curly yellow ribbon. So is it yellow, ribbon, curly, the, or the curly yellow ribbon? Which is the correct order? Is it option 1 or option 2? And if we put these words in order, yes, we're going to say it is the curly yellow ribbon, which is option 2, right? Because we put it in order describing the ribbon. Then shopping bag extra large, the, or the extra large shopping bag, which is option 1 or option 2. So we need to put these words in order to describe the bag. And if we put those words in order, right, we're going to describe the bag, which is the extra large shopping bag, right? That is how we're describing the bag, as an extra large, and it's a shopping bag. Stripe green narrow, a, or a narrow green stripe. All right, so basically if we put these words in order, we will say a narrow green stripe. Well done. All right, so that is basically the end of our lesson on adjectives, right? And we had to identify adjectives. And when we identify adjectives, then we either ask ourselves, it's like you answer the question, what kind of noun, or how many, right, of that noun. That is when we describe or identify an adjective. And remember, we said an adjective, it either tells us more about the noun, it describes the noun, or it modifies the noun. But in all essence, it basically tells us more about the noun. Then we also had to order adjectives, and we had a table that shows us how we order adjectives, especially if there's more than one adjective to describe a noun or to tell us more about the noun. Then you put those certain adjectives in order to describe that specific noun. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson, grade 4. Thank you very much for joining our class. Thank you very much for interacting and for giving answers, right? Highly appreciate that. You should have an amazing weekend further. Goodbye.